Welcome to Sparrow and the Stream, a fiction podcast written by F.C. Shultz. You're listening to Part 1, Episode 1, Liftoff.
Hobbs, what are the odds Mom will return today? Sparrow asked as she got out of bed, feeling the thin, frosty air seeping through the cracks of the watchtower, and took the 4 steps over to her makeshift closet. Her bedroom was a small, square room with a single bed, a pole with few hanging clothes, and a telescope. She pulled on her favorite outfit, insulated long underwear the color of tree bark, her mother's maroon button-down. She rolled up the sleeves to her wrists, and the bottom of the shirt fell well below her backside. A dark moss-green vest, tan-brown hiking boots with creases throughout, and her favorite item of all, her vintage leather football helmet. Her mother had brought it back from one of her supply runs, and Sparrow fell in love with it right away. It wasn't so bulky and heavy that it made her neck hurt like the motorcycle helmet her mother used to make her wear. The leather had softened with age, and it covered the pink, worm-looking scar above her left ear perfectly. Hobbs had calculated the odds almost instantly, but being a robot designed with social awareness, it tried to deliver the news delicately. Miss Hodier, there is a less than 4% chance your mother will return today. The spherical metal ball floated above the hole in the floor which led to the main level. Its 3 propellers rotated in unison, nearly silent, as Hobbs moved fluidly throughout the room. It was such a small machine that Sparrow could hold it with both hands when its propellers were folded inside its metal shell. "That's much worse than yesterday," Sparrow said. "That is correct," Hobbs replied. "Why? It's only been 63 days. It's October 27th, and we've had our first freeze of the fall last night." "Mom is smart. She probably just made a fire to stay warm." The windows were boarded so light could not enter. Sparrow went to the north-facing window and slid the wooden panel to the right. The window was frost-covered, but the sun was already shining through, melting the ice. There was a small patio out of the window. "Yes, that is a possibility. Dr. Hodier has keen fire-making skills." "She's still out there, Hobbs." Sparrow pointed the telescope out of the window and began surveying the land, looking for any signs of life. "She has to be." "Of course, Miss Hodier." "Sparrow." "I'm sorry, I don't understand that command." "Call me Sparrow. Can't you get that through your programming?" "Yes, of course, the nickname your mother gave you when you were 2 months old." "Skies are clear," Sparrow said with her eye on the cloudless blue sky above Reedfoot Lake a mile north. "When was the last time we took the motor out for a search and rescue mission?" "October 3rd, Sparrow." "October 3rd, Sparrow yelled, pulling her face away from the telescope. "We've got to go out today. The skies look clear and it's been too long." "We've done 21 missions by foot since then, I must say. You've been a very vigilant daughter." Hobbs flew just out of Sparrow's reach and just above her head. The smooth voice sounded nearly human, except the lack of vocal inflections on certain words. Words like duh, ought, ter. "It's not enough," Sparrow said. She pulled the panel back over the window. Hobbs turned on a flashlight built into its shell. "We'll take the motor north to expand our radio signal." Sparrow went to the hole in the floor and climbed down the ladder through the opening. Hobbs followed after her. She reached the main floor of the watchtower. Her mother had designed the wood panels to slide on tracks so they could stack on top of each other over one window during the day. Windows filled the walls of the tower. She began moving the panels above the sink, then the countertop, careful not to knock over the hot plate in one corner of the room. A water tank was strapped above the counter with a hose leading to the sink. Next to the counter was her mother's desk. She continued sliding the panels around to an empty wall until she got to the corner diagonal of the kitchen sink, where the door going out of the walkway was located. She pushed the 2 panels around to the southmost wall, where a cushioned recliner sat next to the solar panel battery hub. A small coffee table and couch filled the middle of the room opposite of the recliner and battery. Finally, she let the panels rest in the last corner of the room, where her mother's bed laid like an empty casket. The sun had burst over the hills and filled the room. Only the corner with her mother's bed, covered with the wooden panels, lay dark. According to the Farmer's Almanac, the worst snowstorms occurred during mid-November. "Are you fully charged, Hobbs?" Sparrow pulled an egg in a small pan from under the counter. 93%. Better get on your dock. Might be a long day. Panels don't give you as good of charge. Of course, Miss Sparrow. Hobbs moved through the air and landed inside a small bowl on a circular table in the middle of the room. Its small movements like a hummingbird trying to find a feeder. And anyway, how old is that data? You know I am a closed network robot. Dr. Hodier designed me to function independent of the stream with the purpose of helping humans through facts and logic. I know, Hobbs. Sparrow cracked an egg on the corner of the hot pan and dumped the yellow and white onto the heat. That's old info. You have facts up until what year again? April 13th, 2092. Hobbs, Sparrow said with an excited urgency. I was only 4 then. You don't think things change in 15 years? They do. Everything changes. Stuff changes. I know the world didn't used to be like this. I've read the books. Things change, Hobbs. They get worse, then better, then worse, then better again. The egg was smoking in the pan. Sparrow wiped a few tears from her eyes. Why don't you power down for a while? Charge faster. I'll power you back on when it's time to go. Of course, Miss Sparrow. The hum from Hobbs' internal processor shut off and the tower fell silent. The sizzling of a burning egg echoed off the walls. The burnt aroma filled Sparrow's nostrils. She let out a little scream and lifted the pan off the hot plate and set it on a bright blue oven mitt that read, Minker National Forest Lodge, in faded white cursive script. She took the plate and the oven mitt to her mother's desk and sat down. She stared out of the window while her breakfast cooled. The light painted the tops of the oak and maple trees a lighter shade than their shadowed bodies. They stretched as far as she could see. The mountains to her right were the only things standing above her tower. Despite being so late in the fall, a few geese flew overhead near the tower. Sparrow grabbed the walkie-talkie from its charging stand. The antenna had been duct taped back on after she dropped it from the motor last year, but it still seemed to function fine. She took a deep breath before turning on the radio to channel 22 and began speaking. Castle to Eagle 1, do you copy? She released the thick black button on the side of the device. Static. Castle to Eagle 1, do you copy? The static shortened and the sound of scratching came through the speaker. Mom, is that you? The scratching ended and was replaced with the familiar static. Closer, I have to get closer. She rose from the desk. Hobbs, the circular red light on Hobbs' sphere shell turned green. 3 propeller blades unfolded and spun into action. Hobbs floated above the circular table housing the charging station. I'm listening, Miss Sparrow. What is your battery health? 94%. We're taking the motor out today. I must remind you of the battery level. We have approximately 4 hours of motor time left on the charge. 4 hours? That's plenty. I can't sit up here and wait any longer. Of course, Miss Sparrow. Sparrow pushed the chair under her mother's desk and grabbed the radio. She clipped it onto a loop on her vest before climbing the ladder up to her room. Before Hobbs was able to map out the room and follow her to the second floor, she was climbing back down with a dark green rucksack over her shoulder. An oak bow staff taller than her, with grimy white tape around the center in her right hand and tinted snowboarding goggles resting on her leather helmet. Is that everything, Miss Sparrow? That's everything. She looked across the landscape like a captain at sea. Let's go flying. Sparrow opened the door to the fire tower and felt the frigid air attack her cheeks. She let Hobbs fly through and shut the door in a futile effort to retain the heat trapped inside. She leaned over the rail and looked down the near 60 feet to the ground below. Hey, Hobbs, she said, still leaning over the ledge. Her feet were coming off of the wood plank floor. What are the odds I'd survive if I jump from here? Oh, Miss Sparrow, I would not advise an action like that. What are the odds, though? She looked over and gave Hobbs a devilish grin. 50%? I could only hope they would be that good. Hobbs had now flown over the railing and was facing her head on, trying to ease her back on the deck surrounding the tower. That would be like falling into the ice on Reedfoot Lake. 40? Oh dear, those are the odds of surviving a bear attack. Hobbs was now bumping against Sparrow's helmet, trying to push her back to safety. Tell me the odds and I'll get down. You are an ornery one, aren't you? Hobbs flew back over the deck and floated silently for a moment. 26%? Does that satisfy you? Sure does. Thanks, Hobby. Now onto the motor, yes? With this, Sparrow followed the deck around the perimeter of the castle. The roof overhung far enough to block any rain from reaching someone standing out on the deck. The boards creaked under her steel-toed boots as she ran by. Finally, she turned the second corner and approached the tall metal trunk filling the space where the deck ended. It was the size of 2 refrigerators, side by side, with the chain around the handle. The lock was hanging unlocked. "Probably should have locked that back up," she said. She opened the doors to find a bright red cross-hatched nylon blanket hung overflowing from a bag on the left side. She stuffed the abundance into the bag and slung it over her back. "You must complete the pre-flight checklist before ascending," Hobbs' voice echoed off the metal interior of the storage unit. "Dr. Hodier's rules. You know this." "This isn't my first hot rocket, Hobbs. I'm going to do it," she said as she unhooked a large metal fan from the back wall. "I always do it." She pulled the motor and propeller clear of the storage unit and set it down before slamming the doors shut and hanging the lock on the chain. Then she grabbed the machine and started the process more boring than the pre-flight checklist, carrying the motor down 72 stairs. The propeller was housed in a circular metal frame, which allowed Sparrow to carry it with her hands at 10 and 4. She bent her knees and lifted it 2 inches off the ground. She guessed it weighed about 40 pounds, but she had no real way of knowing. "Watch your step as you descend," Hobbs cautioned her as she rounded the last corner. The robot ball was hovering in front of her. "I don't know what's more dangerous, propelling yourself through the air or trying to carry something bigger than you down all these stairs." "Have I ever fallen down these stairs?" Sparrow said, eyeing the first step. "You have not," Hobbs replied. "Exactly. Why don't you meet me at the gate?" "Of course, Miss Sparrow." With that, Hobbs throttled its propellers and flew over the ledge. Sparrow heard the buzzing of its propellers grow faint. The forest silence returned. Wind pushed tree branches together, mimicking a waterfall. The tower swayed ever so slightly in the wind, causing the wooden floorboards to creak. That was her cue to get to the ground. She lifted her first step over the edge. She was able to peer through the blades in the metal frame cage to try and find the step, but the solar-powered motor blocked her view. She took a deep breath and thought, "I've done this 100 times. Then she threw her weight forward and her foot landed on the first step. Her eyes popped open and she brought her other foot forward and began her descent. The tower was in relatively good shape for being well over 150 years old. The wooden cross beams were supported with rusted metal beams, forming large X's up the side of the tower. Countless steps had been repaired or replaced. The frayed metal braided handrail was seldom used to avoid getting poked by the metal fibers. This was no different, as Sparrow continued from landing to landing, stepping down with her hands on the motor, confidence growing with every step. She reached the second to last level, and a chain link fence sprouted up around her. This was the only adjustment her mother had added. To keep the curious animals away, her mother had reasoned. Sparrow had to set the motor down on the ground to unlock the gate and slide the door open. She went back and pulled the motor through and slid the gate shut, locking it back in its place. "Glad to see you made it in one piece," Hobbs greeted her as she was picking up the motor. "Find a good takeoff spot for me?" Sparrow asked. "I believe Postman Trail will do. The path is clear of debris with a slight negative elevation. I'll do the checklist over there." Sparrow took off in a sprint toward the trail. Hobbs tilted its propellers toward her to keep up. The motor was getting heavy, and all Sparrow wanted to do was to get in the air. Her run slowed to a speed walk as she struggled to keep the metal casing from hitting the ground. She came to a clearing in the trees where the path went downhill to the south. She put the motor down and looked back toward the tower. The trees hid the massive stairs she had just conquered, but the top of their castle was visible. "Maybe I could boost the walkie-talkie signal," Sparrow said, still eyeing the tower. "We could head back up to the tower and use the metal from a lamp to extend the antenna." "I believe that would add a minimal extension to the range." Hobbs circled her and flew in front of her, even with her face. "Is that what you would like to do?" She looked at the little cabin suspended in the air for a few more seconds before shaking her head. "No, I've stayed up there too long. Besides, this is just a little recon flight to extend our range. It could even be," Sparrow hesitated, "fun." "Great plan, Miss Sparrow. Are we ready to begin?" "Shoot is first, right?" Sparrow asked. "Correct. Unfold the parachute and spread it out evenly along the ground, with the straps facing the direction of takeoff." Sparrow slung the bag off of her back and unzipped the opening. a mess of red parachute exploded out. "So, I'm a bad folder. Big deal," Sparrow said, prompted only by her own conscience. Finding one end of the red fabric, she did her best to separate the parachute and lay it flat on the grass. It took nearly 10 minutes to get it laid out properly. "Easy enough. Hook the chute to the motor next, right?" Sparrow asked. "The next step is to check parachute integrity," Hobbs replied. "Ugh, that step is so boring." Sparrow walked a circle around the parachute, open on the ground. After her cursory inspection, she declared, "No holes, looks great. I'm hooking it to the motor now." 4 black carabiners, the size of her open hand, lay at the end of the parachute straps. She grabbed them one by one and connected them on the back side of the propeller where the seat was. "Check motor battery percentage," Hobbs said, anticipating the next question. Sparrow pushed a small red button on the top of the box behind the seat. 67%, Sparrow yelled back. "Forgot to plug it back in last month. Should be plenty as long as we stay at a low enough elevation, right? Won't put too much stress on the motor?" "That is correct. Elevations above 6,000 feet decrease motor efficiency. We just need to get close to Zero City and then come back. 7 miles straight shot if we go over the lake?" "That approximation is correct," Hobbs replied. "Help keep us at the right height, okay, Hobby?" "Of course, Miss Sparrow." "Let's stop talking about it then," Sparrow said louder than anything she'd said previously. She bent down and found the pole and yanked as hard as she could to start the motor. Nothing happened on the first pull. She remembered her mother showing her how to pull the cord in a steady motion by keeping her strength even. She tried again. Focusing her strength, she felt the resistance on the other end of the cord and pulled the motor to a growling start. She lifted the humming motor onto her back, with the propellers rotating, ready to push her forward, and buckled the straps over her shoulders and across her lap. With both hands, she pulled the snowboarding goggles over her eyes, and the forest became a bit darker. "Come on, Hobbs," she yelled, above the purr of the motor. Hobbs lowered into her open hands. The 3 propellers collapsed into the sphere, and a carabiner extended from one of the propeller's holes. She clipped her friend onto one of the remaining loops of her vest. Then she found the 4 cords that led to the parachute and lifted them above her head like she was about to do a pull-up with them. Air filled the chute and Sparrow felt the resistance, but she leaned her small frame forward and started sprinting. Faster and faster she ran down the path. The cords in her hands began straightening out, and she knew the parachute was raising up. She continued to run half the length of a football field, downhill, before it happened. Her feet left the ground.
Sparrow in the Stream is narrated by Sammi Shultz. The music in this episode was provided by Blue Dot Sessions. Thumbnail painting by Taylor Kubicek. For more stories, visit fcschultz.com. And join Sparrow next Saturday, June 8th, for Episode 2, The Meeting.